Here we are.
Here we are.
I made it. We're recording this at like 10:20. Where, I can only speak for myself. I'm still slightly hungover from a good party Epic threw last night.
I thought I was going to be hungover, and then I realized I mostly drank mocktails. I didn't realize it until afterwards, but there must have been a placebo effect.
Well, that's the move. Anyway.
Jacob, what are we doing here today?
That's a great question. I think this is labeled as the Unofficial Unreal Engine Podcast, mostly because we don't particularly want to get sued, or at least I don't want to get sued, and so it's unofficial. But here we are. We're talking about Unreal, and this is our first episode.
Yeah, I think one thing we're both wondering is why doesn't this already exist? Why hasn't It feels like if you looked on iTunes or whatever, you should be able to find at least one ongoing Unreal Engine focused podcast that should have existed over the past 15 years, and no such thing can be found. So what do you think is going on?
I don't know. I guess people don't like talking about Unreal as much as we do, or maybe they don't yet, right? That's the goal.
I was wondering this too, and my hypothesis is that because Unreal Engine is primarily a visual medium, of course there's thousands of YouTube channels and all that. So the challenge here, if we want to take it up, is how do you make speaking about Unreal Engine interesting in a primarily audio format?
Yeah, I think that is a challenge. I mean, because now we're gonna have to philosophize, right, about Unreal Engine on top of trying to vocalize techniques probably at some point. At some point, you're gonna have to teach me how to use some UE5 features, completely verbally, right? It's gonna be one of those when a plane gets out of control, are there any pilots? And they pull someone out of their seat that was just taking a nap or watching a movie, right? Pull them into the cockpit. You get ground control on. Okay, here's what you got to do, right? That's what it's going to be. I'm going to sit in front of my computer. You're just going to have to teach me entirely with audio how to make some game or something, right?
That sounds pretty good to me. Jacob, why don't we start by just speaking a little bit about who we are and our history with Unreal Engine, just to set some context.
Sure.
You first.
Me first? All right. I mean, I really got into Unreal Engine kind of by accident. It was, for me, I want to say my sophomore year of college. I had finals, and I didn't want to study for them. And so I decided instead to stay up all night learning Maya because I always wanted to know how to do real 3D models and make games and stuff like that. And then I got my first VR headset. I was like, oh, it'd be really cool if I've been learning this 3D modeling stuff. It'd be really cool if I could, make a game. And at the time I picked up Unity, the other game engine that starts with a U. We can't really go or throw in Unity on, in the Unreal Engine podcast. But I was using Unity, and then I was trying to make it work. I couldn't really figure it out. And then I started just Googling hey, are there any alternatives that, are a little easier to use? Picked up Unreal and never looked back. I loved it pretty instantly just because it's the kind of thing that just lets you jump in and start creating, right? And that's, I think, always been a big goal for Unreal. Is things look good as soon as you jump in, and I was hooked. So I started working with Unreal, and I became essentially a VR developer working in Unreal Engine. I did architectural visualization. And then, I want to say a year or two into working at an ArcViz studio, building VR experiences, stuff like that, I decided to become an authorized instructor for Epic. So I, took their tests and did a few demo classes, and eventually I got a call, or really an email, from the team at Epic saying, hey, do you want to come in and teach some classes? I said, sure, that sounds great. And so I moonlit as an instructor for a little bit, but I had a full-time job. So eventually I ran out of time and decided, hey, why don't I just talk about it online instead, right? So that's where I am.
That's pretty good. There's a lot of parallels in our stories with one crucial difference. I did not like Unreal Engine the first time I played with it. So a little bit of background, things we share in common, architecture and all that. So when I was in architecture school, I was not great at hand drafting. The entire first year at Syracuse, you had to do everything without a computer. And I had a few professors who were like, Alex, maybe you're not cut out for this. And the problem was primarily that my art background was very like charcoal, sketch, gestural. And whenever I needed to create really clean, nice drawings and models, they'd have like extra glue on them and things weren't looking good. But the moment that I was allowed to touch a computer in my second year, first of all, I liked the fact that in my first year I had to do everything by hand because it forced an internalization of concepts related to like line weight and materiality and all that. But the moment that I was able to use a computer, I found that I could communicate my design intent in a much more clear way. I felt like this whole world had been opened up at first with Rhino and then 3D Studio Max and a few other pieces of software where once I could start adding animations and show all these different design options and modify things on the fly with the professor looking over my shoulder, that kind of real-time workflow got me really excited. And so then I started to wonder, is there any way that I could also make this part of the end user experience, something that's more interactive, something that feels more like a video game? I tried to play with things like, the Source Engine, couldn't quite get into that. I used some free real-time software. One was called Quest 3D, which was all node-based, and, you'd literally drag in like 1,000 nodes for each piece of geometry, and it's like, aha, now I've got my model, and you can walk around and turn on the weather. Cool. And I had another one I liked called Aspirient 3D. After I graduated school, started to play more in Unity also. I did find Unity to be pretty intuitive. I was forced to learn it quickly because I got the Oculus Rift DK1 in 2013 and had told my boss, hey, we'd like to play in VR. I think it'd be great for us to visualize all these theaters we're designing inside Unity and make it interactive and be able to let people look around the hall. And he's like, okay, I want to see this in like a week. And once the kit came in, I was like, oh, this doesn't have like software it comes with that just makes it work. I can't like drag my 3ds Max model into, VR and just have it appear. So I had to very quickly learn, game optimization and what draw calls were and C#, actually JavaScript first, then C# to code everything in Unity. But I was pretty happy with how quickly I was able to get everything working in there. But after, designing a lot of Unity experiences over the years, I found that there were a lot of requests in architecture for something that felt more polished, more photorealistic. And to be clear, you absolutely can do those things in Unity. It just didn't come as naturally to me. And I kept hearing people say, oh, if that's the goal, maybe try Unreal. Right. But when I first started trying to use Unreal Engine, I found that when I was importing my models into it, they were taking forever and they were crashing. Like I'd take a little Revit file that maybe wasn't even that big. It might be like a 400 megabyte Revit file, which in Revit world is nothing. And it would like load in Unreal for a really long time and Unreal would crash or it would be in there and it just wouldn't run well. It wouldn't be smooth. I didn't find the Unreal Engine interface intuitive at first. I spent a lot of time just trying to understand how to find the buttons I was looking for. But then, so that was like Unreal 4.1 or something like that. But then around 2017, Unreal Engine acquired the tools for something that later became called Datasmith. And that, of course, was a very robust and intuitive way to import data into Unreal Engine. And I started to play around with it a little bit more, and I was doing a big real estate project and thought like, oh, this actually might be where I want to be for this project inside Unreal Engine. And I was doing Unity versus Unreal Engine tests. I was on the forums in Unreal Engine asking some questions about Datasmith, and someone named Ken Pimentel over at Epic Games was like, hey, these are really cool in the forums. He said, do you want to speak at Autodesk University 2017 about your experience using Unreal Engine so far? And I thought, oh, that'd be great. And frankly, it also just made me feel very special because I'd been working in Unity at that point for, 7 years almost. And I'd never really had anyone from Unity reach out to me before and be like, this is cool. Good job. Keep it up. So I was already going to Autodesk University to speak on a track that Jeff Model, formerly of CG Architect, now NVIDIA, was curating about VR and architecture and all that. So I had a talk that was going on there. And then I gave this great little talk at the Unreal booth, met Sean Hendricks and all these other cool people who were hanging out there. and then was kind of off to the races. Like really enjoyed working directly with the Unreal Engine team for a number of projects that happened over the years. One big one with Intel, working with Glimpse Group, working with my company Agile Lens, and eventually got to a point where I felt very comfortable in the engine, and just like Jacob, decided it would be fun to become an authorized instructor. And I have kept up with that. I think I've logged something like 300 hours now of teaching classes and creating a few as well. So it's been a blast, and I love the engine a lot. Nowadays doing a lot with, in addition to architecture, live performance, cloud streaming, which of course we'll talk more about. Pixel streaming's a wonderful thing with Unreal, and very excited about the future.
Yeah, that's a good story, that's for sure. So taking a step back though, Alex, I think you're the most fit for this question, which is like, let's pretend someone listening to this has no clue what we've said up to this point. What is Unreal Engine? Like, what is Unreal Engine, right?
I like the notion that someone has been listening this far and is still
to an Unreal Engine podcast and doesn't know what it is. Yeah,
I hope at some point they'll define Unreal Engine. Yeah, Unreal Engine is, I hate to call it a gaming engine, but that's the simplest way to describe it. It's a real-time platform for taking 3D data and visualizing it and interacting with it. And it can work on all sorts of different devices. It can work on computers. It can work in VR headsets. It can work on mobile phones. And, anyone who's played a video game understands what it's like to move through a world or an environment and click a button and have something happen. But what's happened over the past 10, 15 years is more and more of that technology is being repurposed across other industries. So you see things in architecture and automotive and manufacturing and training and education, where the goal isn't necessarily to just have fun, but to actually teach people in a more meaningful way than just rote memorization or having someone lecture at you. Yeah,
that's a pretty good good answer. I think that the only thing that's I would add is that Unreal Engine is like everything and nothing, right? In the sense that like you can do absolutely anything with Unreal Engine.
Yeah.
But it's also like at the end of the day, it's entirely up to you. So like, just like any artistic medium, right? You jump into this and you're just like hit with all these tools, like all this amazing stuff that you can work with, but like it's still just like a generator for your ideas, right?
Yeah.
And so what's happened is that, yeah, like you said, the gaming industry built this because there was unique technology that they had developed to create real-time graphics that looked great and did all this other stuff. And then people started to have new ideas and started to find like different ways of using the engine, like your story with architecture school and stuff like that. And I think today it's so much more like than a game engine, of course, and it's just become this kind of feeder for people to come in and all of a sudden just like express themselves in some like unique, fascinating way. I remember the first time like I loaded myself into with a VR headset into a world that like I had built in Unreal Engine, and how like surreal that was, having like seen it on my screen and then like kind of understood it to some extent, kind of understood the tools probably at a pretty basic level at that point, and then jumping into it, all of a sudden it was all around me, right? So it was everything, like it has everything I could possibly want, and yet it's still completely like up to me to figure out what it could be used for. So like tons of people are out there doing so much amazing work inside of Unreal Engine, everything from like simulation to theater, like you're doing, and then everywhere in between. But I mean, it's just been incredible to watch, to be honest. Like how many new use cases for Unreal Engine people are thinking of these days.
Yeah, and to echo your point, the wonderful and terrifying thing about Unreal Engine is that kind of infinite possibility. I think for those of us that have been using the engine for a while now, the longer you spend in there, the more you realize how little you actually know, because you so learn much.
Exactly.
Yeah, I've seen people who go on a deep dive on a particular topic for a day. They're like, I really want to know the best way to handle Niagara particles for AR in Unreal Engine. And, after that day, they are like a subject matter expert on that. They have learned everything that everyone in the world has ever done with that, and they know the most about it. And that's kind of cool. You can become like the
100%.
foremost expert on a topic pretty quick. But the downside is then you know the most about it, and then, oh, wait, what do I do if I run into a problem? There aren't a lot of people in the world who have tried this. So, it's a great community. A lot of people try to help each other, but sometimes you're paving new ground, and you just don't know what to do.
Yeah, I remember a few years ago when, Unreal wasn't quite as like cool kid on the block as it is today.
Yeah.
Trying to like find answers online for stuff was just almost impossible in some cases. Like if you were doing anything outside of like very straight and narrow video game stuff, you wouldn't find it, but you might find like a search about Unity and then kind of be like, oh, I don't know what that term means, and you'll start like looking through the Unreal documentation. Like the number of hours we've probably collectively spent looking through Unreal documentation is probably absurd. But yeah, it's changing so much. So I think one of the big things that's on everyone's mind is the big major, version update to Unreal 5, right? How do you think that's made an impact in terms of bringing Unreal to more use cases, and generating more ideas?
Yeah, it's a great question. And something I've really appreciated about Epic over the years is when there's something new coming out, they tend to, first of all, showcase it early, and then they release it early. They don't feel like they need to have everything polished and super stable, for better or for worse, when it comes out, which means that they can do something like release, that Matrix demo that first came out, I think, on just Xbox and PS5. And then, a few months later say, oh, here's the 150 gigabyte like source version of that. You can open this up, play with it, do whatever you want. And there's a lot of that kind of stuff they've done over the years where it's like, here's a getting starting point. I mean, for Unreal Engine 5, for anyone who doesn't know, Unreal Engine 5 only released officially, I think back in like March, but they did a early access release of it, a year ago or a year before that. So there's always this kind of idea of, hey, this stuff isn't quite stable yet. It might crash, it might break, but give it a try. Have some fun. See if this is a workflow you want to start to understand. And of course, what's wonderful about Unreal Engine 5 is there's some pretty unprecedented advancements in there, such as Lumen, which is a real-time global illumination system that allows for movable lights. You don't have to worry about baking as much anymore. You can get great performance with real-time lighting and shadows. Also uses virtual shadow maps. And then the other big feature everyone talks about is Nanite, which is almost like a pixel-level LOD system where you can have billions and billions and billions of polygons in your scene. And as long as your computer can at least hold that in RAM, you can still achieve really excellent frame rates because basically as you zoom out, it's not calculating those billions of polygons. It's kind of scaling it down to like, well, what can I see on a pixel level? And if there's 10,000 polygons that are only taking up one pixel, it's really only going to register as one polygon. So the 10 billion polygon scene might actually only need 100,000 triangles of calculation, which is pretty cool.
There's an incredible talk that, I don't know if you saw this, it was going around Twitter a little bit. Brian Karis gave a talk at High Performance Graphics the convention where he was talking about Nanite, but he wasn't just talking about like how Nanite works, which is kind of a talk that he's done a couple times. I recommend people check it out because like even if some of the terms are over your head, like there were definitely a few terms that were over my head because that guy's brilliant. But he gave a talk where he wasn't just talking about, oh, here's how Nanite works. He was saying he was kind of going through his journey of like why he decided to like pursue this and how he got the commitment from Epic to build something like this. And I think it's a pretty fascinating story. I really recommend people check it out. But one of the things he was talking about is his goal from the start was like he thought that one of the biggest challenges or one of the biggest unsolved problems in game engines was the fact that you had to alter like an artist's like process and really slow down everything in order to meet requirements for like geometry detail, right? Mm-hmm. So historically, an artist might make a super high poly model in something like ZBrush or whatever it is, right? And then in order to make it like game ready, you have to take that and you got to crunch it. You know, you got to absolutely destroy it. You got to do things like, you know, texture baking and all this other stuff to kind of cheat it. And at the end of the day, like the artist might not be happy with that, right? Like the artist might not enjoy that. And I think the unanimous decision is that like the majority of an artist's time in games is spent like simplifying assets, and that's just like that makes no sense, right?
It's a drag.
And he also mentioned that apparently studios just really don't keep around high poly assets because they're not useful, and so when they go to make the next game, they can't reuse it because like people have different expectations for graphics at that point, right? So they have to go and like remake all these models. So you're saying that like that motivated him to say, man, there has to be a solution for this. And he was the guy who worked on virtual texturing inside of Unreal, and eventually he saw his chance with Unreal 5 to like go out and build what he had been dreaming of, and that became Nanite. But it was not a straight path. So I really recommend you check out the talk because he kind of shows like, oh man, there were so many different routes he went down. He was talking about voxels. He was talking about all these different techniques and papers that he was riffing off of. And then he finally got to the point where he was like, oh, no, we really can just do this with triangles. And, I mean, it's extremely novel, the way he built it, of course. He's doing all sorts of magic is how I would cap it here, right? Like, it's pretty incredible. And at the very opening of the talk, he opened up this data set from Moana, a Pixar data set. And like Pixar data sets
USD file, right?
Yeah, are legendary for being incredibly, incredibly difficult to use, practically speaking, because internally they have enormous workstations that they would open one of these files up on just to edit. You know, we're talking like hundreds of billions of polygons, like millions of instances. Like he was flying around inside of Unreal at like 45 frames a second, looking at like individual like little spouts of grass or like mold on rocks, like or like individual pebbles, like the size of like grains of sand, and all of that was just running, right? And I mean that's really just incredible. The fact that like so much can be done today that was impossible just because he was committed to like fixing this challenge.
Jacob, is this podcast going to have show notes? Can we put some links in the show notes?
Yeah, I don't see why not. Like I think we'll probably upload this to a few places, including YouTube. Sure. So like check a description. I don't know. Check a little like we'll post it somewhere. People should definitely check out this talk.
Yeah, and by the way, anyone who's listening to this, as you can tell, Jacob and I are kind of feeling out, like, what kind of podcast should this be? What do we talk about? Do we assume people have no knowledge of the subject matter and they're trying to learn about it? Do we assume beginner knowledge, novice, expert? If you are like, I just want to hear you guys do deep dives into all the technical details of Unreal, or, you know, talk about specific use cases, like, we'd love that feedback. We'd love to hear what 100%. You think would make an interesting podcast, because I think there's 50 different versions of this that between Jacob and I we could make. So, you know, we're happy to talk about all this stuff. So let us know what you would like us to talk about.
Definitely. I think I told Alex that, I mean, I would just be talking about Unreal anyways, so like we might as well record it, right? Yeah. But we can definitely take it a dozen different routes. So definitely leave some feedback for us. We'd love to hear it.
Yeah, that's very this generation. I was gonna say what's the latest generation called? But the idea of like, why bother doing something if it's not also going to be recorded and broadcast to the public?
Right, exactly. Yeah, we gotta get our fix of content creation, right? I mean, I don't have an outlet right now. You're pretty active on Twitter. I feel like you kind of have your outlet for talking to the world, like. How did you start getting active in like Unreal Engine Twitter? Like, how did that happen?
Ooh, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I was not an active Twitter user for a very long time. I think I created my account in 2008, 2009, and was like, oh, you only have 140 characters? There's no way to express yourself here. And then eventually, I guess it would have been around when I started to get much more into VR and AR, because I started to pick up on probably Kent Bai was probably my way in doing the Voices of VR podcast.
Shout out!
And
Kent
I started to I started to follow what he was doing, because he'd mentioned sometimes in his podcast, like, by the way, I've done a big Twitter thread about the Venice Film Festival or something. And so I'd go there and I'd see, 30 posts from him talking about all the different pieces. And I started to just, participate in those conversations and get connected with a lot of people in the Unreal Engine, Unity, VR, AR, XR, real-time technology communities. And then I found, Twitter can actually be a really wonderful place as long as you're following and speaking to the right people. Like, I, fortunately, have had very few poor or even, trolly experiences on Twitter, and I know that's kind of rare. But I mostly have found it to be a group of people that feel that the rising tide raises all boats. We should all help each other and support each other. I have a lot of friends that I could technically call like competitors with me over the years, and there are plenty of times where we've been happy to share fixes and ways of going about our workflows to help each other out, which is pretty cool. But I like the fact that Twitter requires a certain conciseness now. I like the idea that you need to communicate things relatively quickly, and especially for folks like us who are super busy and on the go all the time, I also like being able to very quickly get a broad overview of something by skimming through, a few tweets. And that's certainly not how I'd get my news, but if it's like, oh, hey, something's happening with Snap or Magic Leap or Meta.
That was sad.
Yeah. For those listening to this later, like yesterday, the news was that Snap was laying off 20% of its workforce, which is unfortunate and of course brought to mind what people referred to as the Magic Leap snap. That snap referring to the moment in the Avengers, et cetera, but Magic Leap also had a very large and sudden layoff of a lot of their devs. So it sounds like Snap is still fairly committed to the AR space, but a lot of their other departments were hit pretty hard, because I think they've lost something like 80% of their market share in this year alone, which is crazy to think about.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like pretty often inside the ARVR community, you get, or businesses, you get these shakeups because I think to some extent, like ARVR and a lot of this stuff it's out there, right? Like it's a big idea, and I think a lot of people just aren't chasing big ideas, at a lot of these companies. That's not always the case. There's always people internally who are passionate about these things, and then the larger entity, a public company, can't always be about big ideas. Sometimes it has to be about the balance sheet, so to speak. So it's always sad to see this stuff, but at the end of the day, that those people are gonna go out and still spread their ideas elsewhere, and now they have this, quote unquote, like the fire burning under them to go out there and like really show that no, this is real. Like, and I know a lot of the ex Magic Leap guys, that went out and did really cool stuff, or still doing really cool stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they got picked up by companies like Niantic and Apple and Meta, and then some of them started their own companies, which is really cool to see as well. So it's not all bad when some big reckoning like this happens in a company.
No, yeah. Sometimes I definitely feel very bad for the folks who were obviously let out of a job. That always sucks. Like, there's no way around that. But it's always interesting to see where they go next, and I'll definitely be following along, because a decent example of this also happened with a lot of VFX studios right around like kind of late COVID. Disney started kind of laying off specific studios that were no longer kind of aligned with like the Marvel dream, I guess. And they started going out, and now like Netflix has their own studio. They're like half X like Disney, Pixar, etc. guys, right? And it's really cool because now they get to like reinvent themselves. Like, they get to reinvent like their process and their pipeline. A ton of them are looking at stuff like Unreal, right? And so
Love, Death, and Robots.
Yeah.
Love, Death, and Robots, by the way. I got to speak at an event hosted by Chaos Group, now just called Chaos, in Sofia, Bulgaria. And I was really excited for my talk, and then I realized my talk was happening at the same time as Blur Animation Studios, who does a lot of Love, Death, and Robots, and was like, oh, I'd rather go see their talk than my talk. And I was really grateful to the like 20 people who showed up to see me speak. But it is very cool to think that now we're at that point where an entire really excellent looking film can be done entirely in Unreal. And again, going back to things like the tech demos, like there's a really cool Meerkat Hawk demo that you can download and install and take a look at, and has all these incredible grooms, and all the control rig stuff is there for changing, the animation data. It's really amazing how much of this just gets released free for anyone to take a look at.
That was Weta, right?
That was done by Weta, who now is owned by Unity, which is another point of conversation.
They're like, I've said this a couple times to Alex, I think, but like no one knew Weta was for sale, right? I think everyone was like, wow, that's so cool. Like no one knew you could just buy Weta, right? Like at the end of the day, it wasn't, their film production team, I think, is still privately owned, and then all the pipeline, the tools, like all that stuff is now owned by Unity. But when that news came out and there wasn't any like detail about it, I was like, did anyone know that you could buy Weta, right? Like, that's so cool. Like, who doesn't want to buy Weta? Like that's the coolest thing. One of the coolest places on the planet,
Yeah, and I admit the thing that surprised me the most there was I had just assumed, maybe incorrectly, that most of Weta's work was being done in Unreal in terms of real-time technology. Because, Magic Leap, they had an Unreal Engine experience called Dr. Groardvart's Invaders, where you have like robots coming in through walls. And of course, things like, the Meerkat demo and all that. So I thought that Weta had all these tools built out in Unreal. And so I wonder if what's going on with Unity now is if they need to like somehow translate those kinds of things into Unity, or if they're just going to do entirely new stuff. I'll be curious to see how that all plays out.
Yeah, I think there's probably a bunch of motivating factors for Unity. I think, to be honest, they're just pretty behind on a lot of the film animation stuff, because it's never been their focus. Like the majority of Unity has always been about either indie games or licensing the engine for larger game studios, and they really haven't been focusing on film, because like there's a graphical style to a Unity game that you can you can pick it out. Like if you show me a game, I can definitely tell you if it's Unity. I might not be able to tell you if it's like Unreal or like I don't know. I mean, like CryEngine for a while looked a lot like Unreal in terms of like some of the ways the lighting looked and their their lookup tables for color. But Unity always looks like Unity, right? Like every Unity indie game has the Unity indie game look, and I think they're trying their best to make it so that it appeals to like film, TV, and a bunch of these other guys. And like there's still a ton of people doing stuff like simulation, I think, in Unity. But anything that kind of requires visual fidelity, like Unreal has really become the king for that, because it's always looked better. Right when you jump in, like like if you load up the basic template in Unreal, like it looks way better than if you just load in like an empty template in Unity. And at the end of the day, that really matters to a lot of these people, right? Like you're talking to your VFX supervisor at a studio today, and you're like, hey, we should check out this real-time thing, and you open up Unity, he's gonna be like, wow, this looks terrible. Like because you don't have like the HD pipeline installed, you don't have like blah 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 blah, right? You open up Unreal, like, wow, this looks really awesome, right? You just, let me drag in an asset, right? That's how this like gets started, right? So I think Unity kind of sees that as a problem, because to be honest, this is where stuff is going, right? Like their business is going to expand way beyond games, and I mean, Unreal just has a really great head start.
Yeah, and then everything that happened after Epic Games acquired 3Lateral and Cubic Motion and led to all the incredible work with MetaHumans. You see Unity kind of making a parallel move, acquiring Zivo Dynamics and the really excellent like facial animation and digital human work being done over there. So, I want that competition. I want there to be an arms race here. Yeah. One of the saddest things in VR has been that it's really just been a space owned by Meta. There's competitors out there like HTC and Pico and the Valve Index, but they're not really competitors because none of them can hit a $300 or now $400 price point for a VR headset. It seemed like Google was going to be there for a while. On my shelf over here, I have the Mirage Solo 6DoF dev kit that was around for a bit, it's basically a Quest 1. And then Google was like, never mind. So I like healthy competition, and I think you and I have a unique perspective on all this, being familiar with both Unity and Unreal Engine based workflows. So the more they can, get each other to up each other's game, the better.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I'm probably still never going to switch to Unity, but I mean, I think that it's always good to have competition in the space. And talking about the VR stuff, I think that's 100% true. Like, the hardware, the VR AR hardware scene was like the super, like, clash of the titans for a while. Like, it was all the biggest companies in the world going out and trying to make these devices, and they all kind of failed either because they didn't meet like the expectations of the user. Like, I mean, the early Daydream headsets, the Microsoft Windows VR headsets, like early ones. I mean, they still have like visual LEDs, which pisses me off.
I was going to say, if we want to go on rants, like, it drives me crazy that Microsoft started referring to their VR headsets as Windows mixed reality, because there was already confusion about, like, what's mixed reality, what's virtual reality, what's augmented reality, and for them to call virtual reality mixed reality just turned everything into a mess.
It was, I mean, it's always, but all these guys just kind of fought at it, and then I guess the only people that were willing to kind of stick it out was Meta, or I guess Oculus at the time. And I think we could talk a long time about how upset we are about the Oculus to Meta transition. I mean, Oculus was like, there's still people like who say, do you have any Oculuses, like plural, because they're talking about VR headsets, right? Like, that brand was great. Everyone loved it. And it just had to be zucked. Right.
I know. Yeah. So, as we wrap up the podcast, because we both have other meetings we need to get to, again, there's so much here that we'd love to dive into in future episodes. I could even imagine calling episodes topics. We could have like an episode that's, obviously it's easy for us to talk about things like Unity versus Unreal. I could imagine an episode that's based around the idea of like, is Unity really better than Unreal at exporting to multiple platforms? And that could be a discussion. VR, AR, what's that like? What are those workflows like right now? I'm doing a lot of tests with Unreal 5.1 at the moment, because Unreal Engine 5, that release was more tailored toward gaming and not as much necessarily towards enterprise or architecture or even VR or AR. So that doesn't support Lumen or Nanite. In fact, that hurts the VFX industry as well, because nothing with stereo or end display or any kind of IC VFX stuff works with Lumen and Nanite yet. But some of those features are coming online in Unreal Engine 5.1, which anyone can actually download from the source at GitHub, which is pretty cool. And I'm starting to see some really exciting things there on the horizon for that core Unreal Engine 5 tech making its way into other industries. So I could imagine us doing a deep dive into what the state and future is of XR and Unreal Engine. I could imagine doing a whole bunch of stuff about just architecture, live performance, cloud computing. These are all things that I think we'd be thrilled to do some deep dives on. Or every episode could just be this kind of free-flowing stream of consciousness.
We got to have some guests on as well. So
we got to have guests.
I mean, we got to have some guests to come on and talk about some of these topics. So definitely throw down some ideas wherever you're listening, watching, whatever it is, and let us know what you want to chat about, because we can just talk about this stuff. That's for sure. I think we have to do an episode just about 5.1 too. I think we got to just go through the feature list and just nerd out over the different features they're adding. Yeah.
Just scroll through the roadmap and say, "Oh, cool, strata materials."
That's cool. Yeah.
Wow.
That's what I do. That's what I do in my spare time, is I talk to myself about Unreal Engine 5. Like 5.1, right?
I talk to my 5 and 7-year-old about it, and they go, "What's that?"
Oh, that's cool.
They go, "Oh, well, let me tell you, it's very exciting."
All right. Well, thank you for listening, watching, whatever you're doing. And please give us some feedback. Let us know what you like, what you didn't like. And we'll talk to you soon.
The experiment continues.
There you go.